Well, welcome everybody. My name is David Martin. I'm the president of the Arizona Chapter Associated General Contractors. A little bit of protocol real quick that I'd like to go over. If you're a panelist and you're not speaking, would you please mute your line? Also, if you have a question for a panelist, we're going to go through the panelists, and then at the end we're going to have Q&A. You can do it two ways. You can, if you are an attendee watching the webinar, there's two ways that you can ask a question. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a thing called Q&A. Just ask it there, and we'll be more than happy to take your question and give it to a panelist. Or there's also a chat button on the very bottom there. You can ask us that way too. It will indicate to me whether or not there is a Q&A or a chat with a bubble, so I'll be able to see whether or not you have a question. Really quickly, what I'd like to do is explain who our panelists are. Some of them are not on right now. They'll be coming in a little bit later. I'll just do quick introductions, and then as I introduce the panelists, I'll do a quick bio on each of the panelists as I introduce them. But today we have a fantastic panel, and I'm just very, very humbled by the folks we have here with us today. We have Director James Ashley from the Industrial Commission of Arizona. We have Commissioner Dale Schulz from the ICA. Jesse is with us. He's the director of the Arizona Department of Occupational Safety and Health. Justin Timpano, National Account Consultant for Concentra Medical Compliance Administration. Jennifer Yee is a partner at Snell and Wilmer. Mitch Ellingson, Safety Director for Kiewit Infrastructure. He'll be on later. And of course, myself, David Martin. Quick disclaimer. Neither AGC nor anyone on this panel has expressed support for Proposition 207. The purpose of this webinar is to prepare the industry for what we consider could be the eventual legalization of marijuana in Arizona. Before I get started, I'd like to thank Amanda McGinnis for bringing this esteemed panel together. Thank you, Amanda. Well, it looks like Proposition 207 appears poised for passage. The ballot measure is supported by 6 in 10 voters and opposed by just 36%. Large majorities of Democrats and independents support it, as well as 43% of Republicans. This poll was conducted by OH Predictive Insights, and it was done October 22nd through October 25th, 2020. And it was taken from a likely Arizona 2020 likely voter sample. So this is the latest polling information that we have. Quick overview on Prop 207, and trust me, I'm not getting into everything, but I just want to hit some of the highlights. And then we'll talk to, we'll have Director Ashley speak. But Prop 207 legalizes the sale, possession, and consumption of 1 ounce of marijuana for adults at least 21 years of age. It bans smoking marijuana in public places like restaurants and open spaces like sidewalks and parks. It gives the Department of Health Services funding for addiction prevention, substance abuse treatment, suicide prevention, mental health programs, and other justice reinvestment projects. It also allows for employers and property owners to prohibit use at their workplaces and on their property. Like I said before, there are a number of other provisions in the act, but I just wanted to hit some of the highlights today. Our first speaker is Director James Ashley of the Industrial Commission of Arizona. I'm going to read a quick bio, and then I'm going to turn it over to Director Ashley. James Ashley was appointed Director of the Industrial Commission of Arizona by the commissioners in November of 2015. He's originally from the East Coast and is a graduate of New Mexico State University, the Aggies, earning a Bachelor of Business Administration major, marketing major. He has federal government service for James initiated, where he handled facets of district office operations through several congressional terms for 2 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. He served as a liaison to several federal agencies, including the Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, and Departments of Labor and Transportation. In the private sector, James has worked with clients who develop business plans to help establish and grow their business, as well as working with clients on public affairs and policy matters. Thank you for joining us, Director.
Thank you very much, David. I want to extend a special thank you to to David, and also to Amanda for the great work they do with the AGC chapter here in Arizona, which, from what I hear from other sources, is one of the best chapters in the nation. So thank you for the great work.
Thank you.
We always appreciate the collaboration that we can have with AGC, and we feel as though that relationship is strong, and we wouldn't want it any other way. We want that strong relationship and collaboration and communication. Everything from the AGC Safety Committee, I have a great opportunity to always look forward to at the beginning of every year to speak at the kickoff. And I know between Jesse and Phil and Steve and Josh, they attend those meetings. And I know that's very beneficial for both parties, for us to hear your members and for your members to hear about the latest from ADOS from the state plan. Also, the AGC Silica Task Force is another great example of the collaboration that Jesse created, working with Amanda and working with you, David, to make sure that when that silica standard came to fruition with federal OSHA, making sure that we work together to help the industry understand that new standard. And not to mention all the work directly with your members, from the all hands meetings to the conferences and forums. And the stand down events. I know the stand down events this spring looked a lot different than they normally would look, but I know that the chairman and Jesse greatly look forward to those 5 a.m. opportunities to address your staff during the stand downs for all of you members out there. And that's something that is really special and a key part of the year. And then also just to work with everyone to help them understand federal regulations. Now, in the last 4 years, we've seen a gradual slowdown in some of the what I would call the flood, a lot of the standards and regulations that came down the pipeline. We're seeing a reasonable slowdown in that, and that's important. It's important for your members to not have another regulation top of another regulation when they're still getting caught up with the previous ones. And also with federal OSHA now, we're really pleased with this administration. Federal OSHA recognizes the importance and the value of the state plans, and they recognize the importance and the value of the Arizona state plan, which gives us Arizona jurisdiction and authority over workplace safety. We still have that federal OSHA oversight, but they respect the importance of the state plan and the role of the state plan. And I also just have to point out several of your members are VPP partners in the Voluntary Protection Program. Folks on the call are aware of this program. It is for employers that go above and beyond the OSHA standards in safety and health. Just to call out a few: AECOM Hunt, Granite Construction, Lovin Contracting, Kitchell Contractors, McCarthy Construction. I'm sure I missed a couple. Those are some VPP partners. So I just want to take a quick second to share some news from the agency. At the Industrial Commission last week, we actually had a VPP audit for our Industrial Commission Phoenix building to achieve VPP star status. Last year, we received conditional approval on a process that had taken a couple of years to achieve VPP status. We brag about your members and we brag about the importance of VPP. So this was an opportunity to practice what we preach and achieve it ourselves through a strong safety committee, safety huddles, and safety boards that are now virtual. Sustainability of that safety culture and the importance of the culture and the importance to every member of the staff, what safety means to them. And we're not talking just about ADOS employees that live it and breathe it every single day in the course of the work and the tasks that they perform, but for every employee throughout the agency to have that culture of safety is critical. So last week, we actually were recommended for VPP star status. So this is a big accomplishment for the Phoenix building, and we're going down that path in our Tucson building as well. And a special shout out to one of the audit members, a special government employee, was Ninos Juju from McCarthy Construction. And he played a really key role, and he did not go easy on us. We don't want anybody to go easy on us when it comes to safety and health. And we actually had a very thorough audit, and there are a lot of things that we're doing well, but there's more yet to come. And that's something that is a very important milestone for the agency. And again, to be that example to other entities of government that can pursue VPP or PEP as well. But to get to the subject at hand, this is not the first time since I've been at the Industrial Commission that a ballot proposition has raised significant and legitimate concern among our stakeholders. In a different sense, in 2016, Proposition 206, which raised the minimum wage, but also added the brand new law of earned paid sick time, that was a significant concern to employers. So what we wanted to do was work with employers together to help them understand it. And it became an example of how the Industrial Commission helped these employers prepare and deal with the aftermath of that ballot proposition. So before, similar to where we are now, before the election, we thought, you know what, we're gonna have a lot of questions if and when this passes. So we developed about a 15 or 20 item Q&A for employers to help them understand Prop 206. And that actually grew to 75 questions based on our work with stakeholders, with employers, with different groups to help them understand and questions that they had. We grew that to 75 questions that then became an immediate resource for the community and employers and employees throughout the state to help understand what does this new earned paid sick time law mean to them. And we also participated in a lot of the SHRM conferences, the Society of Human Resource Managers, and we found that very beneficial to, again, help get the word out and help share the role that we play in our labor department with the task that we were given by the voters as a result of this ballot proposition to then enforce earned paid sick time. We'd enforced the minimum wage for years and years. The number changed. It changed a lot differently than a lot of folks would have wanted it to change, but that was a number. But when it came to earned paid sick time, that was a brand new law that we worked closely to help employers understand. Working with labor, working with employee groups as well, just to make sure that everybody knew that we were a resource. So that was my message, and that is our message then, and it is our message today, that we want to be that resource and a resource to help. While we don't have as much jurisdiction on this issue as, say, state labor law, we want to help and be a resource any way we can, and ADOSH will play a key role with that. Prop 207, there is so much at stake, and when it comes to workplace safety and a prospect of yet one more layer of a burden for employers and needing to know your rights as employers. In addition to our chairman, Chairman Schultz, and ADOSH Director Atencio, you've got a great lineup of speakers today. But I just wanted to thank AGC. You are doing the right thing about being proactive to address and be ready for this issue. An issue that, quite frankly, we've heard the polling numbers. This is up to the voters, but it is important to be proactive and be prepared, and that's what this webinar is going to do. So I just wanted to thank you again for the opportunity and appreciate the invitation.
Well, thank you for your partnership. We're so grateful. I mean, I tell people this all the time across the nation. We have a partnering spirit at AGC, and whether it's a regulator or whether it is the legislature or the governor's office or corporation commission or whatever, we have a partnering ethos, if you will, working with our fellow partners in the industry. So, and we're really grateful for our relationship with you all and ADOSH and all of our partners. So thank you very much for joining us today. We're really, really grateful.
Thank you very much, David.
Next, we're going to have Commissioner Schultz speak briefly. I guess I don't think he has a presentation, and he cannot be on video because the computer doesn't allow it due to confidentiality. He explained that before when he came on. But let me introduce Commissioner Schultz. Dale graduated from Arizona State University with a Bachelor of Science in Management and started his business career at the Industrial Commission of Arizona. He's worked for 2 multi-state integrated health systems as an insurance broker and as a regulator. Dale has been responsible for self-insured workers' compensation programs, including funding, administration, and injury prevention, including life safety, environmental, radiation, and construction safety. He's been the chairman of the board of the health insurance company and a vice chairman or member of 4 other civic and nonprofit boards. Dale has developed and managed several offshore captive insurance companies for healthcare systems. Dale, thank you very much for joining us.
And thank you, David. And the reason I don't have a camera and can't be shared on video is that I'm in the witness protection program due to federal OSHA having a bounty out on my head for the work that we've done to frustrate them and to assist the employers of Arizona. And I want to tell you, that I'm really, really pleased to have the commissioners that I currently have on the commission, because we truly are trying to develop a different culture. We don't view ourselves as regulators. We view ourselves as being part of the economic engine of Arizona, and are doing everything we can to attempt to support businesses and to change the culture within our OSHA program from focus on compliance to one of consultation. And James and Jesse have been absolutely wonderful about helping us drive that change. So, I will tell you, in 1971, my very first job out of ASU was as an intern at the Industrial Commission. And so now, a whole bunch of years later, I'm chairman. And as Dave pointed out, during those 40 plus years, I've worked for insurance companies. I've worked with claims administration, injury prevention, emergency management, developed occupational safety programs. And I have focused my career on trying to improve workplace safety wherever I was. I won't go so far as to say workplace safety is in my DNA, but it certainly has been my occupation for these many years. Now, with all of those years, in addition to hair loss, I will tell you, I hope that I have gained some wisdom. And in fact, I was reading the other day a quote by Socrates, and I believe he was talking about workplace safety when he said, "The only thing I know is that I know nothing." This business changes absolutely every day. Every year, workplace safety faces new challenges. They can come from legislation, they can come from federal changes, our OSHA standard updates, it can come from needs of the public, it goes on and on and on. And as James mentioned, over the years, we've dealt with such safety issues as the changing silica standard, fall protection. Wow, how many different directions has that taken, which caused us to form a Roofers Alliance to focus on the highest hazard area in fall protection. And of course, much more recently, we updated the AZAGC safety standards to allow pneumatic elevators, much more. So what's the one thing that all these issues have in common? They were new. We were going into the unknown, but we knew we could handle whatever was thrown at us. Many people say many things about workplace safety, whether it's effective, how effective is it, but one thing is absolutely certain: as safety issues change, we adapt. And so I believe, truly, solidly believe that we're going to adapt to whatever changes come in this area and in all areas in the future. So I would like to add a little to Socrates' quote: "The only thing I know is I know nothing, but we'll adapt to whatever comes our way. And we will do everything we can to support our Arizona businesses in adopting to whatever changes come our way." So thank you for this opportunity to participate, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the program. Dave?
Thank you, Dale, very, very much. Really appreciate the comments and appreciate Socrates. I don't know which philosopher it was, but they are always talk about the young folks being out of control, and that was centuries and centuries, thousands and thousands of years ago. I am not, by the way, going to edit any of these comments for Jesse's bio. And let me tell you the reason why. Everything that Jesse has written here is so incredibly important for folks to know. I feel important to just go ahead and read the whole thing. So just bear with me here for a second, and let me beg your indulgence on reading this. Jesse Atencio is the director for the Arizona Division of the Occupational Safety and Health, ADOSH. Jesse administers a state plan OSHA program. Previously, he oversaw all cooperative state program activities that include alliances, partnerships, the consultation project, and outreach training. All work conducted by his staff helped to promote a more connective Arizona in terms of safety and health. Knowing what is required by the OSHA standards is just one area his group strives to help employers understand, although helping them to be a partner with ADOSH ensures management and employees are involved to remove hazards in the workplace without injury or illness. Whether it be a partnership program like SHARP or VPP, his office has been working closely with businesses to go above and beyond the OSHA standards through proactive approaches and thus recognize them for their efforts with a designation only provided by OSHA. Alliances are continuously formed by Jesse to assure that ADOSH associations, organizations, and stakeholders are up to date with the most current OSHA standards, as well as approaches to safety. Prior to this appointment, Jesse started with ADOSH over 14 years ago, where he was hired as a safety compliance officer. During his time as a CSHO, he visited many general industry and construction type settings, ensuring that employers were adhering to the minimum ADOSH and OSHA standards set forth by the state of Arizona. Over the years, Jesse has built lasting impressions with various employers for his enthusiasm and fairness during his on-site inspections. That enthusiasm has been beneficial to ADOSH, to the ADOSH program, as many new and existing employers call upon him for ways to improve their safety and health management system. Thank you for joining us, Jesse.
Can you hear me okay, David?
I can hear you great. Thank you very much.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen to get this started, okay?
Got it. Thank you.
There we go. I have to say, I appreciate the collaboration we've had. I think, David, unbeknownst to you and Amanda, there are many times that I'm going out to a lot of the general contractors that are your members, your safety professionals that are your members at many of the meetings, and we bounce ideas off each other. I get information back from them. But what I always want to make sure I stress back to your members and yourself, Amanda, we learn from you guys as much as what they believe they learn from us. And I think most of the time it's also, we learn more from you guys over time, just because we don't have all the answers to everything that comes up. You know, when Silica came out, there were so many more things that federal OSHA missed when it came to their tables. And we needed that information back from folks that represent the organization, as well as the complete industry that's doing the work out there, including trade partners. So I can't go beyond by saying thank you for having me today. And I truly believe that, you know, a more connective Arizona when it comes to safety and health is a safer Arizona, you know, and there are really good safety and health professionals throughout our state that are doing the right thing. So I'm going to dive right into it, and we'll go right there. So many of you guys all know we are a state plan. If you didn't know, we're the one, obviously we're not the darkest blue, but we're a slightly darker blue than Texas, Kansas, and Nebraska. And the reason why is because we have oversight jurisdiction on both public and private. When you look at like Illinois, New York, New Jersey, those folks just have oversight over public employers. But ours represents at least 99.9% of what's out there. We are Housing and Industrial Commission of Arizona, as what the chairman and director actually already said. We have about 157,000 places of business in our jurisdiction. We have 2 offices, both in Phoenix and Tucson. We do have compliance assistance, as well as consultation and training. I don't want to go too long in here, but I will just mention to you, our commission is very active. You had the chairman talking just a minute ago, Director Ashley talking about the agency support for these cooperative programs. And I can't tell you enough how many times the commissioners, the vice chair, all ask questions about how we're doing when it comes to safety and health. So I just put them up here so you guys all know that they have a very well-rounded and diverse background to be able to ask questions, and they're very good questions, I'll tell you that much. Our leadership staff, I will tell you this, I'm delightfully happy. I think my staff would want 20 more people working alongside us, but we're not top heavy when it comes to the state plan. If you went to Nevada, Cal OSHA is a good example, but if you went to Oregon, you went to Minnesota, those are all state plans. and their leadership team is very big. I mean, there's at least 40 people in some of these programs. We're very small. It is not that hard for people to call me up or send me a text and say, hey, Jesse, I need your help on something. And we'll answer. Same goes for Phil, same goes for Steve. And we do have Renee Rincon, who's usually a person that we don't usually have out there with us because she's in the office doing a lot of our business functions. But this is our leadership team. What we're here to talk to everybody about today is just the workplace safety and the marijuana use. And I will just start off by saying this. There are many articles already out there. I think everybody has seen this happen before. Definitely Colorado would have been kind of like the leader when it comes to having information out there in articles. You got ISHN magazine, which is an online magazine. It used to come hardcover, but they talk a lot of safety and health issues that are out there, and one of them being marijuana as they're featured. You got Construction Business Owner. It's another article that was written out there on the marijuana in the workplace. And this is just to emphasize that, there's a lot of articles being written on it. Is there a lot of science behind it as far as drug testing or having some way of telling somebody or showing that somebody is impaired to a point? Well, that's a little bit kind of out there. And OSHA doesn't get into that, neither does the state plan. But I think one of the biggest issues that came out recently was whether or not federal OSHA requires you to have or would allow you to have a drug enforcement program or some way of testing employees if they were suspected of being impaired at the time. Early on, federal OSHA came out with this and said, no, you will have to test them. And if you do test them, it's going to be a discouragement for them to be able to have fear of reprisal. So they didn't want employers ultimately to have some way of employees not coming forward with these injuries and illnesses if it was due to them utilizing illicit drugs, or in this case, marijuana. That's been cleared up now. OSHA's already walked it back and said, hey, no, you do actually can have a drug testing program so long as that it's equally enforced or so long as that it's equally applied to all employees and it's not just kind of a one-off everywhere it goes. But that kind of was one of the biggest things that came out. What Amanda wanted me to do today was just kind of get a sense of what other states are observing and what they're looking for. And a couple of things that came out is that there's not much information out there. We don't code inspections based on drug use or what we see out there when it comes to their illicit use. What we're there is just to see the hazards. And what I put down here is just a list of things that's going on with the compliance activities and consultation that we observe. Much of the concern has been toward the grow industry. I will tell you right now that if you've ever deep dived into that, you'll see that there's a lot of hazards associated with the workplace. When it comes to the end user or on a construction site, not very much information. And the reason why for that is because you're not intricately in the growing process, extraction, and throughout the term of what you're doing with the plant till it gets to the end user. But I will tell you this, medical use and possibly recreational, it's out there. So ADOS in our compliance consultation process, what we're going to try to do when we're ever out there, what our staff will determine, the scope of work and other information, is to determine if the employer has a drug policy. That's one of the biggest things that's going to help us understand is whether or not you know of the known hazard that could be out there. And just like, there's no alcohol consumption, it's just going to have to be scrubbed up a little bit to just make sure that you communicate or that you actually can understand that, it also includes marijuana use or something else. Is the employer following it? The reason why I put there is because we've had actually instances, David and Amanda, and those listening in, where, it was not equally applied across the board. And it was one of our discrimination cases where the driver was left his post after having an injury and being reported. He left on vacation, came back, ended up using marijuana while he was away. He partook in another state's flexibility at the time to be able to use it. He came back. The management got word of him doing that because he was openly telling other employees because he was injured. They tested him. Unfortunately, though, they had other instances where employees were also having issues at work, causing damage to vehicles, and they weren't being tested. So what really came down to this was whether or not the employer was equally applying the drug policy to everybody. If you're going to be tested for damaging equipment, tested for not following through with something, whatever it may be that caused the issue, we just want to make sure you're following it. Also, too, do employees know of the policy? That's one of the big questions that we've asked before. where employees have the complaints out there where they say, hey, I know people are using drugs and they're drinking alcohol while on the job. Well, one of the things that we try to do to try to get to the root issue there is with whether or not the employer is consistent in their enforcement, consistent in their communication to employees of a zero tolerance policy, as well as, do they do routine inspections? And we'll get to that in a minute. But is the policy reinforced for noncompliance? Ultimately, that's what we're looking for. Serious injuries or fatality caused by drug use, we will always use the medical examiner's report because they will put in there whether or not the employee was under the influence. Sometimes police reports will provide us information whether or not the employee had any type of hardware or stuff that would be in conjunction with paraphernalia in some way. So we will we will get some of that information. But also, too, what really helps us out to determine whether or not this is going on is our interviews. Employee and management, we can definitely get a lot of information on whether or not things are being used, things are being looked the other way, and whatnot. And then we also want to make sure we prevent non-reporting from the fear of retaliation. That's going to be the OSHA 300 log. Multi-employer, I've had this question. Well, what if somebody's on and we find out later, well, let's say somebody got in an accident utilizing a piece of equipment, hurt somebody else on the job site, but later on we find that that person was under the influence. Could you hold me to multi-employer where everyone should know, or if they do know, OSHA and ADOS, we actually look into the creating, correcting, exposing, or controlling. And if you have a portion of that when it comes to the hazard, you equally can be cited. And in this case, we would look to that. But I'll tell you, most oftentimes, I would say 9 out of 10 times, we don't go any further than just the employer for the issue that took place. There are a couple of times that it actually rears itself when it comes to information we get from the general contractor as well as the subcontractor to show that there was some shared exposure there, okay? What other employers are going to do. So another thing that I also talked to Amanda, what we'll try to do is we'll pull a lot of our VPP sites, our SHARP sites, and our partnership sites. And the reason why we wanted to do that was we wanted to just show over here is kind of like some of the top 4 or 5 things that these employers are going to do when recreational use goes into effect, or whether or not it passes. But as David said, the likelihood is pretty high. But this is kind of where they're at. So many of them are not they're not going to change any policies currently in place. They're going to keep them the same as they are. Many of them are going to treat marijuana use on working days as drinking on the job policy. So if they catch somebody, they're just going to go through that motion and go ahead and follow through with what their policy says. Off days, they're going to stress that they can use, but on days that they're there, they cannot. Some of them are not. They were very hesitant about saying if they were going to create a questionnaire to ask employees if they did, so that they can determine should they be operating a piece of equipment, should they actually be in the driver's seat of one of their vehicles. They're kind of on the fence on that one. And then the other one is just continuing with our drug screening policies and procedures. As what I said earlier, the OSHA 300 log, nothing's changed there. If you have one in place and there's question to believe that somebody is under the influence of in this case, marijuana, and there was some damage to a vehicle, equipment, or the office or a building, you just roll right through with it. But this is kind of what they are doing. And these that we're talking about here kind of they implement a lot of best practices wherever they can be. What employers could do as you prepare and get ready for marijuana in the work or being used as recreational, I just want to put here is just management employee involved with the workplace process. I can't stress that enough. If you don't have the dialogue, don't have the communication as far as what's going on in the workplace, a lot of the safety kind of gets neglected or doesn't get to a place where it's above and beyond, where it's always taking care of itself. So I can't stress enough, make sure you continue to work alongside each other to figure out the plan. Analyze the workplace for hazards that are likely to be present. So I just put out here, there's behavior-based observations, there's peer review, third party. Marijuana may need to be considered as present. That would be some areas that I've read some articles recently where they say that, it's easy to say that, most oftentimes people are not going to use it, but it's better to say that it could be there. And if it could be there, that's when you analyze the workplace and say, okay, in these days that we're utilizing this piece of equipment, we absolutely have to know if anybody's on it, because if anything happens, we can be in deep trouble, not only from an OSHA's perspective, but also too from a third party side of it when it gets to litigation. prevention and control, we always talk about job safety analysis, and then we always talk about the core 5 that are there, and that's just elimination and substitution. Just making sure that employers are evaluating and preventing those hazards from taking place. And then just continuous training. I think the more we have awareness of that, if it's in the environment and we talk about it, the more recognition people can have. And also, like with COVID, David and Amanda and the rest listening in, I think that's one of the biggest things I found out is that people are doing these audits, or they're asking basic questions on whether or not somebody maybe traveled to a hotspot, or they were in a location where somebody may have had COVID. I think a lot of that's helped out with it when it comes to them like removing that employee or making a better decision for them to do their workplace duty and not put anybody or compromise anybody's health or safety while they're doing it. We do actually have an Arizona revised statute. I wanted to bring this up. This is something that passed a little over 4 or 5 years ago. And one of the big things is that the commission, the ADOS director, and also the representatives, which would be those COSHOs, compliance officers, we have to determine whether or not if substance abuse was there and it also impaired the employee while working. We have to take that into strong consideration. And that's why we use the ME's report. We get information from the police report, as well as those interviews from employees and management. And many times when we do find this, that it's there, we don't issue citations on that. As long as the employer has a strong program in place, equally enforcing it throughout the organization if they have non-compliance, as well as looking at it with routine training with the employees and making them aware. But it is in there, okay? So I don't want to take any more time because I know that we have Justin and a few others that are going to talk. And I think, David, you wanted me to reserve as far as like to ask questions, but I wanted just to thank you for the time that you guys all given to me. As we get forward in this, I know that my staff has been looking at ways to develop additional training for employers. We used to have a trainer that had a substance abuse type training program. We're just going through a new trainer right now that's going to take the lead on that and give us some additional information so that we can provide out as a resource.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Appreciate that. Now, we do have a couple of questions. I know we're going to go to Justin here real quick. We're doing great on time. So there are a number of folks that are asking whether or not they can get the printed info, and every individual that's on this webinar, we have your email, so we can get that information to you. We either upload it to our website so that it'll be a hyperlink, or we can get it to you directly. So the information will be available to all the participants on the webinar, all the attendees on the webinar. Before we go to Justin, I'm going to read this. It says the chemicals in marijuana tend to last longer in the body. If someone uses on-off hours, if someone uses during off hours, but gets hurt on the job, say Monday morning, the drug could still be in their system. How does the agency want employers to address this? And I'll leave that to either 3 of our panelists that are engaged in this. Jesse, do you want to take a stab?
Yeah, I'll take the lead. So that's going to be a difficult situation to be in. And that's what I was saying, is that I think many employers right now are going to be faced with the unknown. Obviously, people are not going to say anything that they're using or that they did use. If anything, they'll be quiet about it until the issue took place. I would just say that if you have a culture of openness where people are having that open dialogue and saying, hey, I used on Saturday, and you're wanting me to operate, and I'm just going to throw this out there. You're asking me to operate the telehandler or the telescopic rough terrain forklift, and I can't. Is there anything else I can do? And I would just encourage employers to look for other ways that those employees can work on the job site without having to operate a heavy piece of equipment that wouldn't compromise anybody. Otherwise, it's going to be challenging. There's not going to be an easy way to answer that at all.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answered the question. Are there any more questions for our friends at ICA and ADOS? And don't worry, if you don't have to have those questions now, you can hold them. And then we'll just get to Justin. And what we'd like to do, I know Justin may have to get off also a little early. So we'll just go ahead and call an audible here. Go to Justin, do some Q&A with Justin for those folks that would like, and keep folks on the Zoom call here that want to stay on, and also those folks that want to ask questions. Let me just go ahead and introduce Justin Timpano. He's a national account representative for Concentra Medical Compliance Administration. He's an employer drug and alcohol testing consultant for Concentra's Drug Testing TPA division, CMCA. Justin's role is to help employers design drug testing programs to align with their company policies and safety goals. Justin.
Thank you for having me all the way out here on the East Coast. I'm jealous of everyone's weather out there.
You should be.
Yeah. So, and this is obviously an interesting discussion that we're having. I feel like marijuana has been a hot topic for a long time. It's certainly a topic that is a question, or there's certainly questions from my customers, whether they're new or existing, on how do we deal with these things? How do we deal with these changes? This new proposition that's coming up. And I think Jesse did a really great job of what employers are doing. And I think that's following their policy. And I think where we fit in, what Concentra does, is we help them execute that. So we're the medical facilities, but we're also, specifically in my case, the folks that are going to help them design the program to meet their safety goals. So, sorry, David, do you have a question?
Say again?
Oh, sorry, I thought you were
No.
talking to me and you were on mute.
No, I was talking offline because I'm trying to get the other speakers lined up to be coming in. Sorry about that.
Gotcha. That's all right. So lost my train of thought there for a second. But yeah, so going back to, I think what employers are doing and our role in that, of course, is making our facilities available to enforce their policies and make those tests happen, whether it's a pre-placement or a post-accident type scenario. Our facilities are fully equipped to take care of that. So on the theme, and I think the topic of today's discussion, my approach and what I want to bring to the group here is, even though we might not change our policies, I think it's a good time to just take a look at some of the basics when it comes to drug testing. What's out there? What are other employers doing? When are we going to use certain types of drug tests for certain reasons? So that being said, I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint here. And we'll get started with some different testing options. So when Amanda and I were kind of going through what made the most sense in what we covered today, we pinned it down to, I would say, the three most common types of drug screens. So by far and above, urine drug testing is absolutely the most popular in the employer drug testing space. Hair, I would say, is third, even though it's second here. And then we've got oral swab testing or saliva testing. So we're going to take a little bit of a dive into each one of these and basically kind of, again, take a step back and look at when and why we might use one of these types of tests. So just a quick kind of reminder of what the process looks like for each of these. This format you're going to see for the three different categories. But the process of a urine drug screen is pretty straightforward. We're going to have an applicant or an employee come into one of our facilities. They're going to provide a urine sample, obviously in the privacy of a bathroom, to a certified medical assistant. From there, what we're going to do is we're going to take this urine specimen, and we can either do one of two things. We can test it on site, and this is one of the advantages of urine testing, is we can get a very quick result. So if we've got a scenario, for example, I think like Jesse had wrapped up with, where maybe somebody had admitted to using over the weekend and they might be operating a safety, sensitive type piece of equipment, I think the rapid test is really helpful. So the good thing about it is if it is negative, you're going to know that right away. If not, it's going to take your standard, 1 to 2 days to get that test result back. But I think it will rule out any potential risks for anyone working in like a non-DOT type environment, where we can feel comfortable in saying, hey, the test was negative. We got that back really quickly. We're not going to lose production time. We're going to be able to get this colleague back to work. So on the flip side of urine testing, you've got your standard, more traditional drug screens that we would call lab tests. So these are going to be urine drug screens that are always going to go to the lab. We're not going to test them in the clinic to get that quick result. So I would say rapid is really common. Lab testing is also still common, but probably not as much as the rapid anymore. Results are, of course, reported out, directly from the lab, or they're going to be reviewed if appropriate. If something is found in the specimen, they're going to be reviewed by a medical review officer, where there's going to be an opportunity for the donor or employee in this case to say, hey, I'm on a prescription. This is why this is showing up in my system. So kind of the nuts and bolts of the process and how a urine drug screen works. Why a lot of employers typically lean towards urine drug testing, why it's the most popular. I think, given the nature of what we're seeing out there today is there's a lot of different drugs, unfortunately, and there's a lot of different environmental factors impacting employers and what they could be seeing. So for example, certain parts of the country, unfortunately, are going to have a tougher problem with opioids. So maybe we want to expand what we're looking for certain types of drugs to make our safety program a little bit more effective. So the customization with urine drug testing is there. You can have a catalog of options to look for when it comes to drug screening. The other thing is, because it's so common, and drug testing being a commodity, it's inexpensive. And then, of course, one of the other benefits, like I had mentioned, is instant testing is available. So going back to, I think with Jesse, again, Jesse, you did a great job. I keep alluding to your presentation, but like you had mentioned, and I think the question we might have had already was, how do we determine when usage took place? And specific with marijuana, unfortunately, we don't. The products are in development. You're going to find stuff on the web that will say they can do it. I haven't found anything, nor have we as an organization, that we're going to implement in our clinics just yet. I think we're really close. From what I've read and the research I've seen, I think a product will come that's going to be like a breath alcohol or a breathalyzer that will say, this is how much marijuana is in someone's system at this exact moment. We're not quite there yet, though. So that being said, the overall detection window for urine drug screens, for the most part, is going to be within that 2 to 3, 2 to 4 day, meaning I've taken drugs within 2 to 3 days, so that's what's going to pop up on this test. Marijuana, on the flip side, for infrequent users, when we're looking at a urine drug screen, a couple of days, the standard detection time. But for habitual users, they could stay in their system in a urine drug screen up to a month. So just something to consider, when we're doing pre-placement testing or our time-sensitive, reasonable suspicion post-accident type scenarios. So I'm going to switch gears to saliva testing. The process for this is obviously going to be a little less invasive than a urine drug screen in terms of the collector is just going to basically give the collection device to the employee. They're going to throw it in their mouth almost like a toothbrush, take a quick swab. We're going to take that, we're going to send it out to the lab. There are saliva instant kits out there. There isn't anything in terms of the caliber of testing that we look for that we have and we offer. So there's definitely instant saliva tests, but nothing that we are in love with in terms of quality of results. So everything we do in terms of saliva testing is lab-based. And again, the process in terms of way saliva tests are reported out is very comparable to urine testing, where it's going to go to a lab. The lab will either report it, or if it's potentially positive, the medical review officer is going to take a look at it, have a conversation with the donor, and then go from there. So why some folks would, or employers might lean towards saliva testing versus urine testing, I think a lot of it has to do, obviously it's less invasive. It's always observed. So we've got our specific state laws where some places will allow observed collections and others won't. With the oral swab, it always is. So I think the opportunity to try to maybe tamper or beat a drug screen is a little bit lower in terms of percentage, because you're going to watch somebody take the device and put it right in their mouth. All right, so the The other thing I think that's it's something interesting to think about with marijuana these days is the detection time is much smaller. So we're only looking at about a day of usage. So your habitual use scenario with urine or hair, as we'll get to, is going to go out the window. We're looking at a much smaller window. So it's still not, I think, ideal in pinpointing exactly how much marijuana is in someone's system, but it's probably the smallest window of the three main options that we're going to look at. All right, so we're going to keep moving here to hair testing. The hair test is pretty much the opposite of the urine drug screen and the saliva in terms of detection time. We're going to start with taking about 100 to 120 strands of hair, which sounds like quite a bit, but it's roughly the width of a pencil, as you can see here. We're always going to send it out to a lab, and again, the process for reporting is identical to the other two options. Big difference with hair, urine, and saliva testing is the detection window is huge. So for your, I would say, ultra safety sensitive type positions, this is a really good option to look at, especially from the get-go with pre-employment testing. So if we want to make sure we've got very little, if any, risk of usage, hair is the way to go. The detection window for all the most common drugs that we're typically going to look for is going to be a month to 3 months. So food for thought there. Again, obviously why folks are going to lean or employers are going to go towards hair testing. That window is really big. The return of positives is really high. So again, our ultra safety sensitive positions where we really can't run any risk at all. This, I think, makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, it's always an observed collection. Hair testing is incredibly difficult to try to beat. So just to wrap things up here, I think I've mentioned some of these items before, but this is just a quick grid as to when and why most employers are gonna choose certain types of drug screens. Urine and saliva, again, are both going to fall in that same category where they're really applicable for all different types of scenarios. Hair, on the other hand, reasonable suspicion and post-accident testing, these are time sensitive. These are things where we want to capture recent usage. Hair is not going to paint a good picture there. It's going to have a really big window, as we saw before, so it might not be the best usage of that type of test. Not saying that you can't do it or you shouldn't, but just giving you a kind of an idea of why employers aren't in those types of scenarios. So I feel like that's probably a lot of drug testing talk for all of us to digest. I think, David, we're talking about maybe opening it up to some questions for me at this point. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. Perfect. These two are sort of related. So I'm going to ask them together, and then I'm going to go to our ADOS folks, ICA folks. Also, we have some questions that are popping up for them. But for you, Justin, and I'm going to read this one verbatim, but I'm going to conflate it a little bit with another question. How are tests administered to determine if an individual is indeed under the influence of marijuana? And sort of augmenting that question is, give us some insight on the type of testing you're seeing as promising, because you mentioned that in your presentation that there are some that you thought could have some promise.
So I'm blanking on the name of it. It's Hound something, but essentially it's the same idea, and it actually looks quite a bit like a breathalyzer. So it's a handheld device. I don't know how far it is in terms of being accepted amongst the drug testing community as a valid resource. I know it isn't at the moment. It seems to be getting some legs, but I guess to answer the question, from my experience, from what I've heard from other folks in the industry leaders, folks at some of the bigger labs out there, we don't have anything that's really close yet that will duplicate what a breathalyzer will for alcohol.
Okay. Does anyone else want to try to tackle that that's on the panel? Anybody heard anything?
Nothing further to add.
Go ahead. You had nothing? Okay, Jeff.
So one other thing
Go ahead, Justin.
So one other thing I will add, and I think what employers have been doing even before, marijuana became such a hot topic of discussion, whether it's with this proposition or with other states like Colorado kind of, leading the charge with legalization or medicinal uses, is employers are always following their policy. And I think they're stepping up training in terms of how to identify, how to properly document, why somebody would appear to be, under the influence. And we offer, and we partner with a really great company called Visify, and they offer online training courses on how to properly recognize and document why we might think somebody's under the influence. And it goes beyond just your, hey, they look like they're a little bit off today, your common sense type stuff. It's, are we noticing patterns of behavior, that kind of thing. So I think what I'm seeing is employers just really dialing in their policy and dialing in their training.
Great. Anything else on a follow-up on that, Jesse and James, anything? Okay, we got some questions coming in here. Assuming the 207 passes, this is to our ADOS folks. Jesse, I believe that's you, and Director Ashley. So assuming 207 passes, does that affect how ADOS will address injury-related accidents where employers immediately requires a drug test?
Will you repeat that one more time, David?
Sure, I'll read it to you verbatim here again. Assuming 207 passes, does that affect how ADOS will address injury-related accidents where employers immediately requires a drug test?
So no, that was what I was talking about earlier. So thanks, David, for repeating that again. Is that in the beginning, it would have affected employers because OSHA had a negative connotation with it, saying that if you have a drug testing policy, it's gonna be against you when it comes to enforcement because you're preventing your employees from coming forward, and providing this information. What's changed now is that you can have an actual drug testing policy, and as long as it's being followed through and there is no way for employees to be discriminated against, it's all good. So in this case, if you do have somebody that gets injured and the employer does have some way of testing because it's part of the policy and they follow through with it, there isn't going to be a big issue with ADOS. We're going to just look to make sure that it was accurately applied based on the policy, and then we go from there.
Director, anything as a follow-up?
Yeah, Jesse, if you could maybe elaborate a little bit when it comes to an accident investigation. It doesn't necessarily mean that there was a hazard created by the employer. There's an accident investigation based on an incident that may have been, quote, an accident itself. So that investigation aspect would still continue unrelated. If you want to elaborate a little bit on that, Jesse.
Correct. So part of it is that if it is, let's pretend, okay, somebody used. There's a high probability that everybody says this person used. We knew about it. We're going to do our own independent study. The MEA does it too. We still would do the investigation through fruition, David, and the rest of the listeners, because we still have an obligation to provide that evidence and information to the commission to hear. And part of my communication to the commission would be whether or not there are any other hazards associated with the workplace at that time. Also to kind of like what the reason behind the actual incident took place. And if there was drug use, we would say that right away. There's been many times within the commission that we have mentioned it, that somebody was utilizing illicit drugs, or in this case, marijuana, and that would have been a contributing factor to the injury or illness that took place. And that would help us with the ME's report, again, the interviews that we do, as well as the police report.
You may have answered this, but I may not have caught it because I was reading this for the next question. So you might have already answered this, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway. If an employer could prove an employee was impaired at the time of the accident/inspection in which employee was not complying with the employer's safety rules, is that a defense to an OSHA citation?
That's great. So I wouldn't say it's a defense. It's just communication to us saying that, The reason why this could have happened was because this person was under the influence of whatever it may be. That would help us to determine, you know what, if there's just a single source of a hazard that was created by that person, then we just close up the inspection. But if we were able to show that there was other things going on or that were contributing beyond just the use, then unfortunately we would still have to carry it through to figure out whether or not there was another hazard created by what that person was doing beyond what the influence was by the illicit drug that they were using. That does happen.
Okay. This may be for Justin. It could be for Director Ashley and Jesse. If we wanted our corporate safety manager to get training on more advanced recognition / observation for detection, can you recommend a class where that person could go?
I'll just chime in on that. That's actually a really good question. Earlier, I mentioned the work that we had done with SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Managers, a couple of years ago regarding the passage of Prop 206 in 2016 with earned paid sick time and the other laws there. We'd have to look into that. There may be some other answers on the panel, but we will look into seeing whether or not an association such as SHRM has any resources in terms of training or classes that might be beneficial. We'll look into that.
Great, thank you very much. Justin? Not Mitch, hold on, Mitch.
Yeah, I think SHRM is definitely a great, it's definitely a great place to get started. Like I mentioned, we offer some online trainings that are specific to reasonable suspicion. Content is provided by a company called Visify. I think they're a great resource. But yeah, both of those options I think would be a great starting place. If folks get stuck, David, please feel free to pass them along my way, and we can direct them to the right folks.
Okay, so we've onloaded our two additional speakers. Justin, stay as long as you can, if you can. And I think Director Ashley, you're gonna have to leave too, right at 3, correct?
Yeah, I've got a little more time.
But stick around as long as you can. Hang on here, I got another question before you go here. Hold on. Okay, so if Prop 207 is passed, then marijuana is basically like someone going out for a beer for dinner, correct? So if they use only a non-working hours and test positive on a urine sample for pre-employment, is the employer discriminating against the applicant?
Nope.
No. I'm talking from the state OSHA program. No.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm talking from a contractor that's gone through this. So no, I mean, it's a federally illegal drug, right? So just because states make it legal doesn't mean it's legal. It just means it's legal to possess and it's legal to consume. It doesn't mean it's legal in the workplace.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mitch.
Yep.
I'm going to introduce you in a second, Mitch. Don't go anywhere.
Okay. I'll be quiet then. I'll be quiet. I'm not here.
Justin, anything else on that subject? And we don't have it. There's more questions here, but I'd like to get on with the program. So
yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I think Mitch made a great point. I think, the presentation I gave and the different drug testing options that I was walking through all apply to what I would call a non-regulated space. Basically these are all non-DOT versions of these tests. But like Mitch said, the DOT does not recognize marijuana or any marijuana state-specific laws. So if you've got drivers that, fall under FMCSA or some type of safety-sensitive function, this has absolutely nothing to do with those policies. Continue to do exactly what the DOT tells you to.
Great. Thank you, Justin. Stay on as long as you can, Justin, please.
I will.
Questions you can answer. Jennifer, thank you very much for joining us. Can you hear me? And you're on mute, just to let you know.
I can hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. You are next in the queue, Jennifer. Let me introduce you real quick. Jennifer's use practice is concentrated in labor and employment law and commercial litigation. Her litigation experience includes federal and state court practice in a variety of employment-related issues. Jennifer has assisted her clients in defending against wage and hour discrimination, harassment and retaliation claims under the FLSA, Title VII, ADA, FMLA, ADA, USERA, and the Arizona Wage Act, the Arizona Employment Protection Act, the Arizona Civil Rights Act, and other laws, the other state and federal laws. She also assists employers with respect to investigations by EEOC and the Department of Labor and the NLRB. In addition, Jennifer drafts employment-related agreements, handbooks, and policies, and has worked with employers to enforce non-competition and confidentiality agreements. Jennifer, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. So I'm going to share my screen here really quickly so you can see a PowerPoint presentation that I prepared.
Great.
Okay.
Perfect. Almost there.
Almost. Okay, perfect. So you guys have obviously been talking a lot about marijuana in the workplace, and I'm going to talk about that both in the context of Prop 207 and our existing regulatory scheme with the medical marijuana laws that we have, because that's the current state of the world that we're living in, and quite honestly, that's going to be a lot of what is reflected even if Prop 207 is passed, but we'll get into that in the presentation. So state cannabis programs are very prevalent, as everyone may know. Here in Arizona, we currently have a medical marijuana scheme, but obviously on the ballot is the recreational marijuana proposal, which these black states is where you can see recreational marijuana has been legalized as well. There are very few states where marijuana use is still illegal. That's these states represented here in gray. So it's really, as you can see, a patchwork of state and local regulations regarding marijuana use, including marijuana use in the workplace. That being said, marijuana and cannabinoid products are still illegal under the Federal Controlled Substances Act. So if you have, you know, like you said, a DOT certified driver or employees that are subject to federal government contracts, it's still an illegal drug under federal law. So it's kind of a unique sort of conflict between federal and state law here. But cannabis is not going away. I think this slide is pretty interesting. It shows projections of retail sales for cannabis, both for recreational use and medical use, and it is going up exponentially. So even if Prop 207 doesn't pass this year, it is certainly not an issue that's going away in this state or any other state. It's just too much of a moneymaker. So talking about where we currently stand, we have Arizona's Medical Marijuana Act, which was a 2010 initiative which permits a qualifying patient with a debilitating medical condition to obtain marijuana from a dispensary that's licensed. And uniquely, it also prohibits discrimination by employers against registered card holders in certain circumstances, which we will get to in a second. This program has exploded since the beginning about 10 years ago. You can see the number of qualifying patients here and the number of authorized dispensary agents that are licensed through the Department of Health and Human Services has gone up, and these numbers have actually gone up even more. The timeline here ended in July of 19, and the numbers have continued to increase. So even under the current scheme, it's been increasing year over year. And if recreational marijuana were legalized here in Arizona, we would expect the same thing as well. Now, AMA's non-discrimination provision is rather unique, and I want to go through the actual language of it because it really helps to show people what are the bounds and limits of this. So here's the language that I want to highlight here. Unless the failure to do so would cause an employer to lose a monetary or licensing related benefit under federal law or regulations, an employer cannot discriminate against a person in hiring, termination, or imposing any term or condition of employment, or otherwise penalize that person based on either the person's status as a cardholder for medical marijuana or a registered qualifying patient's positive drug test for marijuana or its metabolites, unless the employer can show that the patient used, possessed, or was impaired by marijuana on the premises or during the hours of employment. Now, usage makes a lot of sense, right? Like if you catch somebody on the work site with a baggie of marijuana, that's pretty straightforward. Same thing with possession. If it's in their vehicle and the vehicle is parked on the company job site, then that's really straightforward. But what does impaired by mean? Impaired by is really where the rubber meets the road in a lot of circumstances. And virtually no testing method can guarantee a finding of impairment. That's the reality. You really should have other indices or indications of marijuana impairment. And as our friend SpongeBob here shows us, you know, these are all the familiar symptoms of marijuana use, like dilated pupils, the smell of marijuana, bloodshot eyes, sleepy appearance, reduced motivation, anxiety, difficult thinking. Those are all things that if they're observable of the employee during working hours, and you have someone to back up that they observed that sort of symptom or sign of the employee, then you objectively could say that there are signs of impairment there, which would take you out of this anti-discrimination provision that we're talking about here, which otherwise prohibits punishing an employee just because they have a positive drug test. So that's really important to have those signs of impairment, not only observed by somebody, but contemporaneous records taken, whether it's a note or a text message or something like that, so that you're relying on something other than just the drug test to show that there's impairment during working hours or on working property. And this is really emphasized, this concept of having signs of impairment in addition to the actual drug test. In a recent federal district court case here in the District of Arizona from a little over a year ago, or almost 2 years ago at this point. And this is the Whitmire versus Walmart case. And this case considered the interplay between the Medical Marijuana Act and Arizona's Drug Testing of Employees Act. And that drug testing law basically provides a set of guidelines for employers to implement if they wish to have a drug testing policy in the workplace. And if an employer chooses to follow those guidelines, then they have immunity from civil lawsuits from employees relating to, say, liability for wrongful termination if the employee was fired for a drug test or the results of a drug test. So it gives employers guidelines to follow and contains some safe harbor provisions, which as lawyers, we obviously take advantage of. So this case considered some potential conflict or interplay between those two laws. And the facts of this case are really important to consider. So Whitmire held a valid medical marijuana card, and after she sustained a work-related injury, she was given a drug test, which is very common, and she tested positive for marijuana metabolites at the highest level the test could record. And her employer, Walmart, terminated her based on its zero tolerance policy for drugs and the results of the employee's drug test. She filed suit claiming that she was discriminated against under AMA because they didn't have any sort of signs that she was impaired while she was in the workplace. There wasn't any person who wrote down on a piece of paper, yeah, I saw Whitmire with bloodshot eyes or slurring her speech or looking sleepy or anything like that. They were solely relying on the drug test alone. And Walmart here claimed relief under the drug testing law, saying that the high level reported on the positive drug test supported their HR representative's good faith belief that the employee was impaired at work, which, kind of makes logical sense, right? Like if you're off the charts in terms of the drug test itself, and the drug test was taken while the employee or very shortly after the employee was at work, it's a reasonable inference, or it would be a reasonable inference, as this employer argued, that the person was impaired while they were at work. Well, that's not necessarily how the cookie crumbled. The court actually ruled in the employee's favor, finding that Walmart failed to establish that the employee was impaired at work. And really the central issue here was the positive drug test at a high level alone enough to support the employer's good faith belief that the employee was impaired while they were at work. And the court kind of skirted the issue as to whether the drug test itself could prove impairment during a particular point in time. But the court was very, very clear that that is a scientific matter that required expert testimony in this case. So in other words, Walmart offered their HR representative, who clearly was a smart person who could read the results of the test, and said, hey, here's an affidavit from this person that said she considered the drug test, and because of its high level, that gave her a good faith belief. And the court said, no, 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 that's not good enough. We need an expert. We need a scientist. We need someone who can actually quantify what this test means in order to have an inference that the person was impaired while they were at work. So there are limits to the testing, and that's why it's so important to have those objective signs of impairment if you are going to take an action based on a positive drug test. So that's a lesson learned from a recent court case here. Now, I want to switch gears here for a second to safety sensitive positions, because obviously, especially with this audience of general contractors and folks in the construction industry, we've got lots of folks who are in safety sensitive positions. And here's how that all came about from a legal standpoint. So back in 2011, the legislature amended our, somewhat dated drug testing law to provide more protection for employers when it comes to safety sensitive positions. And although there's no penalty for complying with the drug testing law, employers, as I mentioned, who choose to comply are provided this safe harbor so they can be shielded from certain types of civil lawsuits. So it's really important to take advantage of this. So here's the protection that basically was put in place. If the employer has a good faith belief that an employee is currently using a drug, whether or not for medical purposes, and that drug could cause impairment or impede the employee's job performance, the employer can exclude that employee from performing a safety sensitive position without having to worry about being sued. So obviously, the next question is, well, what safety sensitive position? How do we classify that? How do we categorize that? And a safety sensitive position is, according to the statute, any job that the employer believes in good faith could affect the safety or health of the employee performing the task or of others. So examples that are included are those who operate motor vehicles, machinery, equipment, people who repair or maintain the performance or operation of equipment like that, the malfunction or disruption of which could result in injury or property damage, so that's pretty broad. Employees who are performing duties in the residential or commercial premises of a customer, supplier, or vendor, those also qualify. Employees who are preparing or handling food or medicine, or employees working in any occupation regulated under Title 32 of the Arizona Revised Statutes, which includes lots of things, but the medical profession is an example of that. So really, when push comes to shove and you as the employer need to decide, okay, are we going to take advantage of this provision in the law and classify this as a safety sensitive position for which we can move a person out because of a drug issue, how do we do that? Where do we write that down? How do we come to that determination? And what I tell employers is, you should really be doing that on the front end, because that's going to give you the strongest defense here. So for example, if you maintain written job descriptions for all of your positions, does it indicate in the job description that it's a safety sensitive position? If the answer is yes, then you've got a great argument to support if you need to take action against somebody because of their position being safety sensitive with respect to any drug that they use, whether it's, marijuana or anything else. Same sort of issue with the employee offer letter. A lot of times employee offer letters spell out job duties or anticipated job duties or the type of position. And if you think ahead as a company and you put in there that this is a safety sensitive position and the position is contingent upon you satisfying the requirements of a drug test or anything else that's a pre-employment requirement, that offer letter or the language in that offer letter is really going to support your case if you have an issue later on with having to take action against an employee for any type of drug use, marijuana or not. So as pretty much any lawyer will tell you, put it in writing, and that really helps support your argument later on, and ideally not after the fact, but before. So next I want to turn to recreational marijuana because that's a large part of the reason why we're all here. And there's actually a lot of support for recreational marijuana. And this study is this Gallup poll is a little bit dated. It's from 2018 or goes to 2018. Probably not is a huge surprise. There's more support among Democrats than Republicans for legalizing recreational marijuana. But there's really not as much of a gap as you would think. And so, you know, this is something that came very close to passing the first time around here in Arizona. And it's looking, you know, like it's going to be a close case this year as well. You know, back in 2016, Prop 205 sought to legalize recreational possession or use of marijuana for individuals who are 21 and above. And it was just narrowly defeated by just over 51% to about 48, 49%. So it was a very narrow margin that recreational marijuana was defeated last time it appeared on the ballot a couple years ago. So if that's any indication of the chances of what a close vote it may be, you know, that certainly is a harrowing statistic for us or people like me who are looking at this issue very closely. And at the time that Arizona considered this back in 2016, similar recreational initiatives were passed in several other states, including California, Massachusetts, and Nevada. So that led a lot of pundits to say, hey, you know, in a couple years, it's kind of inevitable, you know, Arizona's 2020 ballot may receive enough support to pass a similar sort of initiative. So it's a little bit of reading tea leaves at this point in time, but you know, if you learn anything from history, then that could be a good indication of where we're going. So as you guys have probably heard about earlier in the presentation, what's on the ballot is Prop 207, or the Smart and Safe Arizona Act, which seeks to legalize, again, possession and use of recreational marijuana for folks who are 21 years and older under certain circumstances. It enacts the tax on marijuana sales. It requires DAHS to develop rules to regulate marijuana businesses, kind of similar to the scheme that happened when medical marijuana was passed back in 2010. So if this is passed, we would join a whole plethora of other states who recognize, you know, legalized recreational marijuana. And there's also several other states who are set to vote on this issue as well. So the million-dollar question, why you guys are all here, what does Prop 207 allow in terms of marijuana in the workplace, right? This is the key thing here. And the answer to that question is no, Prop 207 doesn't change your ability as an employer to have a drug-free workplace. And specifically, you know, the statutory language is important to look at here. And this is the proposed Arizona Revised Statutes 36-2851. And it expressly provides that that law does not restrict the rights of employers to maintain a drug and alcohol-free workplace or affect the ability of employers to have workplace policies restricting the use of marijuana by employees or prospective employees. So in terms of your written policies, which are oh so important, because if you're going to take action against somebody based on a positive drug test result or the signs of impairment that you observe, you want to make sure it's in a written policy that you can point to. And this law, if passed, does not affect or hinder your ability as an employer to have those types of policies, which is good news. The law also does not require an employer to allow or accommodate the use, consumption, possession, transfer, display, transportation, sale, or cultivation of marijuana in a place of employment. So basically, it makes clear that employers still have autonomy to regulate the workplace and have drug-free workplace policies and policies against possession or cultivation or use in the workplace, which is very, very good. So basically, Prop 207 would maintain the status quo as it relates to the relationship between employers and employees with respect to marijuana in the workplace. So it would basically be, you know, existing under the prior scheme. If it's for medical marijuana purposes, you got to look at it under AMA, which we talked about earlier. Or if it's under recreational marijuana, then you look at these provisions and say, okay, we can enforce our written policies as they are written, which is
Jennifer, is
good
that
news.
in the statute, that what you just read just now in the initiative? Or
Yes.
is it currently in statute?
No, this is in the proposed initiative.
Initiative, got it, thank you.
Yep. Okay, So what are the takeaways for employers? What are best practices to consider? Whether or not Prop 207 is passed, what are the takeaways from this? Okay, so especially in you guys' industry, you got to evaluate carefully whether the position is truly safety sensitive. You know, it doesn't meet one of those criteria that we went through. And if it is, make sure you document it. Make sure it's in a written job description or in an offer letter or somewhere designated that you have a safety sensitive position. Because if you're going to exclude a person from that position or take that position away based on their use of any drug, whether it's marijuana or a prescription drug or anything else, you want to make sure that you have that documented somewhere so that you can legitimize your argument that it's a safety sensitive position. So that's point number one. Point number two is anytime there's signs of impairment in the workplace, whether it's recreational marijuana, medical marijuana, oxycodone, you know, anything under the sun, identify and document those indicators of use. You know, think of the SpongeBob graphic that I showed you, blurry eyes, wandering around, kind of your typical signs of inebriation or being under the influence of some sort of drug or substance in the workplace. Make sure you identify exactly what those signs are and document them or have somebody document them. It doesn't have to be in a formal signed written statement, but a contemporaneous email or a contemporaneous text message, creating a paper trail of somebody telling somebody else that they observed something about the employee in the workplace that seems suspect goes a long way 6 months or a year down the line if you're fighting a legal claim. The other thing I would recommend is absolutely have and follow your written testing policy. Like I said, under the Arizona Drug Testing of Employees Act, which provides safe harbor provisions if employees, or excuse me, if employers follow that law, you should have a written testing policy and you should follow it. And so if you follow it, you get to take advantage of those safe harbor provisions. So absolutely follow your written testing policy. And if you haven't had legal counsel take a look at it in a while, have legal counsel take a look at it, make sure it's covering everything that you need to have covered for whatever types of employees you may have in the workplace. Because again, some employees fall into certain categories like DOT versus non-DOT that can affect the language of your drug-free workplace policy and your testing policy. Like I said initially, and you know, showing the Whitmire case as an example, don't rely on the results of the drug test alone. The drug test is a critical component for sure. I am not discounting the value of drug testing. I think it is very valuable. But you shouldn't rely on those results alone. You definitely need to keep an eye out for other signs or symptoms of impairment in the workplace, because that'll give you a backup so that you can have something to support if the results of the drug test or alcohol test are disputed. And finally, if you're unsure, consult legal counsel. It's best to get advice on the front end of things as the situation is developing, rather than taking action and then trying to figure out and untangle the mess later. So that's all that I had. Do we have any questions from the panel or attendees?
Hold off just for a second here. Okay, we're coming into the home stretch. Okay, thank you. Really quickly, what I'd like to do, Jennifer, if you have time, I'd like to sort of take what you've discussed, talk about the practical implication with Mitch. Okay, and then cabal those questions after he speaks, if you have time. Do you have time, Jennifer?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So why don't I go ahead and introduce Mitch really quickly. Mitch, are you going to need this to use the screen? No, you're on mute, just to let you know.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay, we have Mitch Ellingson, who's the District Safety Manager in the Central District for Kiewit Infrastructure. Mitch is an experienced safety manager with a demonstrated history of working in the construction industry. He's worked for Kiewit for over 13 years. He worked his way up through the crafts, such as a laborer, and has an exceptional ability for making safety personal. Skilled in incident management, injury prevention, incident investigation, injury management, as well as trend and root cause analysis. Strong operations background and a professional degree, and he graduated from Bellevue University. Mitch, thank you for joining us.
Sure.
Floor is yours.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm going to be able to add much more than everybody else. That's the drawbacks of going last, I guess. But, you know, I am in Colorado now, and, you know, I spent 10 years in the Southwest District, which is based out of Phoenix there. So I'm pretty partial to what's going on back there. So, you know, since moving up to Denver, it's been kind of a change, right? You've seen a little bit of difference between what happens in areas that doesn't have a marijuana law and the areas that do. And I'll tell you, we've seen, you know, anything from an increase in incidents on the job with post-accident drug testing. You see an increase in drug and alcohol use based on that. So we've seen a lot of increases there when it comes to equipment damage and company asset damage and stuff like that. A lot of things we see, and it goes back to what Jennifer was saying, you know, we see a lot of decreased productivity, decreased morale, a lot of increased risk taking on the job. And so those are signs and symptoms of stuff. And I agree with Jennifer, if you're going to be doing any tests, even if it's after the test and you find out, make sure we document that there were other things that happened. You know, the guy was sluggish, the guy was, or gal was, you know, decreased motor skills, stuff like that. And just, it definitely backs you up there. You know, one of the problems we had, or we're still having in Colorado, is there's a lot of work going on. And so when that happens, the unions become depleted. And if you're a union contractor, you probably know what I'm talking about. When the union gets depleted, you get kind of the bottom of the barrel. And when you have a big job like we have here in Denver, they're basically out of people to support you. So at that point, we were hiring anybody off the street that could pass a drug test. And it became almost comical that they would come in shorts and flip-flops, and you knew they weren't going to pass a drug test just by the way they were acting. So make sure you got a really, really good, robust drug testing program. I would suggest having an outside person doing those tests just so the paper trail does not lead back to the company. It just makes it a lot cleaner and a lot easier, especially if there's any kind of union grievance or a legal lawsuit. The other thing that we've noticed, right, is testing cheaters and the way they cheat the system or attempt to cheat the system. And a lot of them carry clean urine bags, and they'll hold them close to their body so it will retain some of the body temperature. Diluted urine's the same way, right? So if you got somebody who's trying to delay, make sure you keep an eye on them because they're probably going to go out and try and do the flushing system, which means they're going to go out and just drink a lot of water, go find some place to release it, and do that 3 or 4 times. And by doing that, they're flushing everything out. It takes your body a while to get it back through the system as far as the THC goes. So that's one way of cheating it as well. So make sure you're doing a lot of good temperature checks on your urine samples. Make sure that we're keeping an eye on people, you know, and they're not allowed to leave a general area. And if you're taking them to a third party, make sure you escort them there, or you have a time frame from the time they leave the site to the time they get to the testing facility, so you know that they're not stopping off somewhere and getting something to try and bypass the drug testing. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and you guys have pretty much talked about it pretty extensively, is the alcohol versus marijuana excuse. And we hear that a lot, saying, you know, I go out last night and I had a few drinks and I'm sure I still have some, you know, some alcohol in my system, but I'm still allowed to work because I'm not impaired, because there is a testing procedure that tells you if you're impaired or over the legal limit. And there is nothing when it comes to marijuana that says, hey, I'm impaired. So in Colorado this year, they were trying to pass a bill that said we would not be able to have any kind of repercussions for somebody who tested positive for marijuana on the job, because you don't know if they're impaired or if they had it last night or the night before, because marijuana stays in your system a lot longer than alcohol does. We were fortunate enough that we got enough petitions that got it off the board. So we were able to circumvent that this year. I'm not saying that's going to happen forever. And the problem is, once they pass that, then you have to go through the federal guidelines and take it to Supreme Court and try and overrule it that way. And it's just going to be a problem. So hopefully we can keep that off. What we have done, at least here, and we've been pretty successful at it, if somebody comes in and says, hey, I've got American medical marijuana card, we go back to the fact of whether or not we can reasonably accommodate whatever it is they're trying to do. And so we've gone through the legal process on that. We've come up with a pretty good excuse that, you know, if you're going to be using marijuana, just like if you're using a drug that's going to impair your abilities, we can't reasonably accommodate that. So we've been able to let people go on that respect. You know, the reasonable suspicion, I'd like to go back to that because I think Jennifer made a really good case for that, is making sure you got people that are trained on reasonable suspicion, make sure they understand the guidelines of what it is you need to look for. It's very, very similar to alcohol. You know, the smell is different, but all the other signs and symptoms are pretty much the same: decreased motor skills, poor decision making, increased risk tolerance, you know, memory loss, just a lot of things that resemble alcohol. So if you can get your people trained up for alcohol, it's pretty simple to get them trained up for medical marijuana as well. So, I mean, I could talk about a bunch of things, but it sounds like we've talked about them all. It's probably a good time to just open everything up and we can ask questions and answer.
Okay, great. You know, the attendees, Mitch, you have a great deal of experience in this area. So the folks that are attendees, feel free to take advantage of the panelists that we have remaining on the webinar, because you have at your disposal right now quite a bit of experience and depth in this area. I have one question for you, Mitch. Since I know Kiewit is signatory, have you had to amend the language in the collective bargaining agreement to address this issue? And if so, can you explain sort of what that is?
Yeah, I mean, we've gone up to all the unions and expressed to them that we have a zero tolerance policy for marijuana, alcohol, any kind of drugs that doesn't have a valid prescription, and they can still perform their work safely. And so with that language, it pretty much gives us the ability to question anybody that's under any kind of medical you know, disadvantage, I guess, when they're at work. So if they're showing any signs or symptoms, or if they pop positive on a post-accident drug test, the unions have said that they understand our stance and they will support the decisions we make based on those positive results.
This question may have already been answered, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm going to err on the side of over asking than under asking. Okay. So, and this may be for Jennifer, are employers allowed to disqualify potential candidates as a result of their marijuana usage?
Yeah, it depends on if the person is a registered medical marijuana card holder here in Arizona. And like I said before, if the person is a registered medical marijuana card holder here in Arizona, then you can't discriminate against that person in the hiring process just because that person had a positive drug test for marijuana. So the answer is no, you can't refuse to hire them just because of a positive drug test if they have a valid medical marijuana card. Now, granted, there are exceptions to that rule if, for example, it would cause the employer to lose a monetary or licensing related benefit under federal law, then that rule doesn't apply. You know, and there's also an argument that if the person is going into a safety sensitive position, that the Drug Testing Act provides a safe harbor. So there are ways you can get around it, but the general proposition is under the medical marijuana law that currently exists in Arizona, if you have an applicant who has a positive test result, then you can't discriminate against that person in the hiring process just based on that positive test result.
Okay, you mentioned the issue of safety sensitive. I'm going to go back to a couple of those safety sensitive questions, okay? And I'm going to read both of these questions because I think you can answer them, Jennifer, at the same time. Who determines if a position is safety sensitive, and can an employer designate all positions as safety sensitive?
You were cutting out a little bit, but was the question who determines if a position is safety sensitive?
Yes, and can an employer designate all positions as safety sensitive?
Okay, so I'll answer the first question first. Who determines whether a position is safety sensitive? That's typically somebody in HR or somebody in management who has knowledge of the position, because keep in mind, the designation has to be in good faith. So if you have some muckety muck who sits in their office 500 miles away and knows nothing about what that person is doing, but decides to input in the system that it's safety sensitive, that's not necessarily going to be a good faith belief. In order to have a good faith belief that the position is safety sensitive, you have to have somebody either in management or HR who has enough knowledge about that position to really quantify or have input that is knowledgeable to have a clear understanding that they meet the criteria of safety sensitive. So it has to be somebody with knowledge, but not a specific person. And the second question is, can we designate all positions safety sensitive? Well, the answer to that really depends on what are your positions doing. If everybody satisfies the qualifications for safety sensitive under the statute, then sure, there could be a situation where all of your positions are safety sensitive. But, you know, most companies, that's not going to be the case, right? You have to do a good faith analysis based on every single position and what that person is doing. What is that person doing on a day-to-day basis? So having a blanket statement that every single one of our positions is safety sensitive is not going to meet that good faith requirement. You got to look at it on a position by position basis.
Well, I'm going to follow up with that because this is another great question, that if someone is not in a safety sensitive position, are they protected from termination if impaired at work?
Yeah, and again, that question depends on whether they're a registered medical marijuana card holder. So if they're not authorized, if they're not a registered medical marijuana card holder here in Arizona, as we sit here today, then they have no protections. They can be terminated in accordance with the company's policy. However, if they're a registered medical marijuana card holder, then they have the protection of the Arizona Medical Marijuana Act, which says that the positive test result alone can't be a basis to terminate somebody. You have to be able to show, for example, that the person used, possessed, or was impaired by marijuana on the premises or during hours of employment. And that's why it's so important to have people document and be observing those other signs of impairment, because you want to be able to pinpoint if it happened during working hours.
Great. Mitch, I think this one's for you.
Okay.
It's about non-workers compromising the work zone and hurting other workers.
Non-workers, you mean as far as like pedestrians, third-party people?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's been a problem with us specifically on this I-70 job. We've got it in Denver. We've had a lot, and I mean, 4 or 5 accidents a day on I-70. And I would tell you 30 to 40% of them get out of their vehicles and run. So we would assume that based on the findings of our police department, right, there are reasons to believe that those 40% have been impaired by alcohol or drugs because of what they found inside the vehicle. So there's been quite a few. We just had an accident 2 weeks ago where a third-party person entered a road closure protected by cones, so it wasn't a hard barrier closure, but a third party came inside the closure at 4:05 in the morning and rear-ended the back of one of our trucks and injured one of our employees, and she was under the influence of marijuana. We had another individual last week rear-end one of our cone trucks doing about 80 miles an hour, sent 3 of our employees to the hospital, and unfortunately he passed away, but he was impaired as well. So yeah, there is a lot of issues with impaired drivers, whether it's alcohol or marijuana, or, you know, there's even other drugs that are available and legal within Colorado that have created a problem. So yeah, third parties, people not in the work creating problems is a huge problem for us.
Okay, two of these may have, like I said, I'm going to err on the side of, hold on, I got one coming in here, right? Hang on a minute here. I'm just gonna make the comment that came up. I worked for a company in Denver who drug tested post-accident. Employees would just resign. There was one point when we had to bring in temporary employees to cover for the full-time employees. This is a problem, folks. Just reading the comments. Okay.
It is.
So like I said, I'm going to err on the side of over asking, and that's intentional to make sure I didn't miss anything. I have two more here, and this one's for ADOS. If an employee simply tests positive for marijuana, is that a defense to an ADOS citation?
I think that was answered a little earlier, David. And I had said that we would look through the evidence and the information that we gathered during the fact finding. And if it was isolated to that one employee and no other employees in the area, then we would consider it done and employee misconduct. But if it wasn't, and it was exposed to other people, people didn't follow the policy, people knew about it, well, then we're going to have to open it up and determine if other people were exposed, and therefore a citation could be issued.
You want to augment that at all, Mitch or Jennifer? Okay. Can a person who tests positive through a random test on a non-safety sensitive position be terminated and the person does not have a medical card?
Yes.
Okay. That's pretty direct. I think I have exhausted every single question we have received from the audience. Is there anyone in attendance that wants to ask a final question to our esteemed panel? I'll give you a couple of minutes to go ahead and punch it into the chat or the Q&A. Give it about 30 seconds here, and if I don't see anything, we'll close this out.
How about how do you protect your workers in war zone? Do you have to do more now that you're in a state that has recreational marijuana? Do you have to plan?
Mitch, do you have to plan further? Do you have to, are there more steps that you have to take in states that have legalized casual use marijuana?
Other states?
Are you, let me try to put this in context. In states where marijuana is legal, are there more steps that you have to take for your safety plan and those kinds of things than in states where where marijuana is not legal?
No, I don't think there's anything on the upfront side. It's more on the, how do you react to it? How do you legally control it, right? So back to Jennifer's discussions, right? We got to make sure that we train up our people to understand what the reasonable suspicion is for medical marijuana, or even just marijuana use or drug use. And it's very similar to alcohol. So it's not that hard to get your people trained up. You got to have enough people in there so two or more can agree, and that way you're protected. Because if you're not, like Jennifer said, you're probably going to be hiring them back, and you're going to be paying them back pay, and there's going to be a lot of other things you got to deal with. So.
Okay,
I actually have one comment on that point. So if you're in a state that legalizes recreational use of marijuana, which Arizona may become that state here, you want to make sure that your drug-free workplace policies specifically prohibit recreational marijuana use, because if it doesn't already say that recreational marijuana use is prohibited, employees don't have the clear message that it's prohibited. So you want to make sure that you're transparent as a company, and you can always go and point back to your written policy that says, hey, this is a prohibited substance in the workplace. You can't necessarily infer that or expect people to know that. And you can have a drug testing policy that outlines the circumstances for testing and everything else, but I've seen a fair number of drug testing policies that miss the critical point, which is we don't allow marijuana use or possession in the workplace, whether or not it's legal recreationally or otherwise. And so you want to make sure your written policies are up to date that make clear, regardless of whatever testing scheme you have, that use or possession in the workplace is not acceptable, even if it is legalized for recreational use.
Great, thank you. I think what would be helpful to our membership, Jennifer, maybe you can help me with this, and maybe you can work with Amanda on this, is sort of come November 4th, perhaps put out or maybe even before that, like we're doing with this webinar, maybe put out a sort of, you got to get this done now, immediately. I don't know if it's an FAQ or something to that effect. I don't know, but maybe some general grass tops of things that maybe need to be done, and we can get that out to the membership and refer them to the appropriate legal counsel, including yourself. So
Yeah, so what we're going to do if this passes is issue what's called a legal alert. And if you're on our firm's mailing list, then you get these free of charge. They're just emails in your inbox that contain recommendations based on developments in the law. And this would obviously be a huge development in the law in Arizona if this passes. So if you're not already subscribed to Snell and Wilmer's legal alerts, then just send me an email and I can make sure you get subscribed. And you'll be receiving any sort of legal alert that we issue related to the passage of Prop 207 and what employers should be thinking about.
okay. More questions are coming in.
Good.
Does usage for topical marijuana products used for arthritis, pain management, etc., absorb into the skin, resulting in a positive screen result?
Same thing. Doesn't matter if it's ingested or if it's topical. If they have an elevated in their body, and you have a drug testing policy that strictly prohibits the use of drugs and alcohol, then it's the same result.
You can't differentiate, right? That's the problem, right?
Right.
Okay, can you ask an active employer if they have a M&M card based on a post-accident positive result before taking disciplinary action? Can you ask?
No, they would have to supply that, right? So if there was an accident and somebody tested positive for marijuana and then they produce the card, as long as you are doing what Jessica said, right? As long as you're doing the reasonable suspicion, you're documenting the changes and the differences in the employee, you've got stuff to follow back on, and you can terminate that employee.
Jennifer, anything to follow up on that?
Yeah, and you were cutting out just a little bit. Can you repeat the question?
It says, can you ask an active employer if they have a M&M card based on a
Medical marijuana.
positive test result before taking disciplinary action?
Yeah, so as part of the testing process, the employee, if they got a positive test result, would have an opportunity to present the medical marijuana card to the medical review officer. So the process goes, if there's a positive confirmed test result, then the employee has the opportunity to present any evidence that might explain that positive test result. And that explanation can be for a number of reasons, right? Like if it's a positive test result for amphetamines, for example, and the employee is taking a valid prescription that could cause a positive test, well, then the employee would present that prescription to the medical review officer. Same thing goes with medical marijuana cards. You know, during the testing process, the employee has to have an opportunity to present, their card to explain the positive test result. And then at that point in time, you would go through the analysis that I shared with you earlier, which is, okay, in addition to the positive test result, can we show that this person used or was impaired during working hours or on the premises?
But Jennifer, let me ask you a question from here. So if you have a person who tests positive for amphetamines or marijuana, they've got a card, and they're an operator or they're in a safety sensitive position, can you go back to, and this is what we've done here in Colorado, I don't know if you can do it in Arizona, can you go back to reasonably accommodating that condition, right? Because if they're an operator and there is no level of what is impaired and what is not impaired, can you assume that they are under the influence of that drug and you cannot reasonably accommodate because they're an operator or they're in a safety sensitive position?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is people who are in safety sensitive positions are in a special category, right? You can do more things with them. You can move them out of that job or take actions against them that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily be able to take against employees who are in non-safety sensitive positions here in Arizona. If you're in a safety sensitive position here in Arizona, you can take advantage of the safe harbor that I was talking about, which allows you to take actions that you wouldn't otherwise be authorized to take.
Okay, I'm going to ask Mitch to that point again. I'm going to go a little further, Mitch, on this. Okay, can we? And this may be a Jennifer question, or I don't know how engaged you are in collective bargaining agreements. Okay, but can the collective bargaining agreement declare that all positions covered under the collective bargaining are safety sensitive?
I would say yes, in the fact that every position that we have, right, whether you're working at heights, you're working in a trench, you're working in a vehicle, you're working whatever it is, you should be able to, as long as you've got HR putting together your package of work descriptions, there's no reason why a union or even a non-union employee shouldn't be put in a safety sensitive position unless, I mean, if they're working in an office and all they're doing is working on a computer, it'd be hard to tie that back to safety sensitive. But in a work zone, I do not see how if you had the right people writing the description of work, that it wouldn't tie back to something that would be safety sensitive.
I guess, Jennifer, does it meet the threshold that you talked about? Okay, you have folks around the collective bargaining table, right, discussing the importance of safety, and we just incorporate that every position is a safety sensitive position. We incorporate that in the collective bargaining agreement. Does that meet the criteria that you mentioned before about it being a credible source, not the person 500 miles away? You know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, well, I guess my question would be, do the people sitting around that collective bargaining table know what they're talking about? Do they have knowledge of what these people are actually doing? Because if they do, then I think having that language in a collective bargaining agreement is a great piece of affirming evidence to help support the employer's good faith belief that a position is safety sensitive. But if you're with a bargaining agent that, again, is across town, hundreds of miles away, doesn't know what these employees are working on or doing, a blanket statement in a CBA that says every single one of these employees is safety sensitive, that is not going to be enough legally on its own to support a good faith belief. You got to be able to show that good faith comes from somewhere with somebody with knowledge. And that may be people who are sitting around negotiating the CBA, sure, but it may not be. It depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, I guarantee it is in this case. I mean, we could defend that all day because we know that our business managers, from the laborers, the cement masons, the operating engineers, and the carpenters, are very, very engaged. Many of them came through the craft and understand that. I think from a credibility standpoint, we're on pretty good solid ground there, Mitch. And Mike Lee is listening to this. He's with the operating engineers, and he and I will discuss it later. But he has a question in relation to, we have sort of this piston of tests, right? And his question is, what is the deciding factor for the level of impairment of a marijuana user? I mean, is it aggregate? Is it one component? What are you finding out there, Mitch and Jennifer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of an actual marijuana test, there is really limits to the scientific ability to say that somebody is quote unquote impaired based on the amount of marijuana metabolites in their system. That's why it's so important to have those objective, observable signs of impairment that are recorded. Because, look at the Whitmire case. I mean, that woman tested at the highest level that the test could record. And, the court still said, yeah, that's not necessarily a sign that she was impaired at work. They had no other evidence, and they didn't have a scientific expert testify that test showed that she was impaired at the workplace. So the testing has limits. Sure, the testing is important, but it's one step in the process for being able to show that somebody was impaired on the job or during working hours.
Can you ask a potential employee if they have a medical marijuana card?
Yes, although you can't discriminate against that person just because they have a medical marijuana card. So just because they're a medical marijuana card holder doesn't mean you can say, nah, we're not interested in having those people in the workplace. You got to look at it on a specific person by person and job specific basis. So again, if we're talking about safety sensitive positions and you've made that good faith analysis and good faith belief that you can't have somebody who may be using medical marijuana in that position, okay, that's a different story. But if it's just for someone in an office environment and you interview for a secretarial position and that person somehow lets slip during the interview process that they have a card, whether or not they talk about their use or not, you can't say, oh, well, we're not interested in you, because that would be discrimination.
Okay, great. We have exhausted the questions, and I'm so grateful for those folks that hung with us. It was really a great showing of folks that came to see this webinar. There's one question that was asked of me, and that was, what are we going to do as it relates to the video of this? And it's going to take a little while, but what we'll do is we will upload it to our YouTube account and provide that link to folks following this. It'll take a little while. I have to go through a little bit of production, but it will be available. Thank you very, very much. Any closing comments? Jennifer, we'll work on that thing, leaping off with your alert. We're really interested in that, in letting our folks know right away on day one, maybe some high touch points that they need to act upon quickly.
Yeah, just send me an email. If you're not already subscribed to Snell and Wilmer's legal alerts, just let me know and I can get you on the email list.
Say your email address one more time.
It's jryeee@swlaw.com.
Great. Thank you. Any closing comments? Mitch, Jesse, Dale? If not, thank you very, very much for taking the time out of your day. We're so grateful for you participating in this extremely important, extremely timely event in informing our membership. By the way, just to let you know, we did not limit this to the membership. We felt that this was so important to let people know we spread it out to the entire industry. We were telling other industry organizations that they can send this to everyone. So we had quite a large base of people that listened to what you all had to say, and it was very important. Thank you again. And yeah, remember our next webinar is tomorrow on the budget series of Pima County. So you're more than happy to join us for that. So thank you all very much and have a great and safe and blessed weekend. Thanks. Bye-bye.